To get started, last week, Sarah was covering the eye for the eye verses in Matthew 38 through 41. And so today we're going to begin with Matthew 5:42, which said, "Give to him who asks, and do not turn away from him who wishes to borrow from you." And Barclay starts discussing this on page 195 in a section that he calls gracious giving. And he says that it's Jesus's command that we should give to all who ask and never turn away anyone who borrows. And it's based on Deuteronomy 15, 7 through 11. So I thought that I would start with reading that because it is in the book. So, if anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The seventh year, the year for canceling debts, is near, so that you do not show ill will toward the needy among your fellow Israelites and give them nothing. They may then appeal to the Lord against you, and you will be found guilty of sin. Give generously to them and do so without a grudging heart. Then, because of this, the Lord your God will bless you in all your work and in everything you put your hand to. There will always be poor in the land. Therefore, I command you to be open-handed toward your fellow Israelites who are poor and needy in your land. So a number of places in Deuteronomy, he's saying, among your fellow Israelites, among your fellow Israelites. And that sounded kind of like, well, I guess, Jewish people, that's who they're going to be giving to. Had anyone heard of the seventh year before?
Yes.
They said, be careful not to harbor the wicked thought the seventh year. I hadn't heard of that. But every seventh year, there was a cancellation of all debts. And so some people, if it's getting close to that time, people who might be giving to their fellow Israelites may not have the possibility of ever getting anything back if they consider it lying or whatever. So they said that that's an evil thing to think of.
Susan, oh, it's all of us. Your audio is getting real distorted.
It sounded like Darth Vader.
Yeah. Now you're okay.
You're fine.
Maybe it was Deuteronomy that caused it. Did you get the gist of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
in there's a collection of ethical teachings. I don't know if you probably have heard of it. The Pirkei Avot. Have you heard of that? It's a chapter of the Fathers. It's a Jewish traditional writings, but it's kind of their ethical teachings. And there was a quote in there that together with the Torah and service or prayer, the practice of charity is one of the pillars on which the world rests. Giving charity does not impoverish, and not giving is tantamount to idolatry. Charity is an act of devotion and the complement to prayer. As such, the wise give charity just before praying. And so Barclay goes into the 5 principles that the rabbis use to govern giving. And one of those is that giving must not be refused. So you need to be careful for everyone who refuses charity, they say they're going to be an idolater. I guess so you're worshiping money or things. Is that the way you read that?
Yes.
That's how I understood it, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so you must not refuse giving. Giving must befit the person to whom the gift is given. So that's rather than just giving money, you're trying to give them something that is specific to what their need is. So people must not be given whatever they lack. You're not giving them the bare minimum they need. You're trying to give them what they need to be at a comfortable level. And it says not only not only remove poverty, but remove the humiliation that poverty brings. And I don't know if our giving now is that way. I mean, we're giving food. I know that when we have refugee families come in, we try to really set them up, you know, to give them a wide range of their needs, to cover all of their needs, whether it's schooling and transportation and everything. So I kind of understand that from that. Giving must be carried out privately and secretly.
I liked this part. And when I read this, I thought this is how, because my favorite charity is the food bank. And so I give money to the Central Virginia, it's Feed More now, it used to be the food bank. And that's how this works. I give anonymously, and then they give food to people. And so the people who are getting food, I don't know who I'm benefiting, and they don't know who I am. And I like that. And when I read that, that's what I thought of. It's like, that's how the nonprofits make this work.
Same with Caritas and St. Jude's,
Yeah.
which are two of my favorites, in addition to Feed More.
Yeah.
Right. And Week of Compassion is one of my favorites, because much the same way. So
Unfortunately, I grew up in a very judgmental home, and I think I give more when I don't know who the recipients are than if I did, because I would be judging the recipients. I have a very close friend who helped with the chasm, and she said you wouldn't believe the circumstances people came to pick up their food bags. I mean, just overflowing in apparent physical wealth, and we're showing up to get free food. So
that's somewhere. And there are also people at the very opposite.
of course.
Yeah, but it's that small number that take advantage of the system that unfortunately tarnish.
Yeah. And he addresses that in the book. He says it's better to let, I forget what he says, some number take advantage than to miss one truly needy person.
Yeah. And 20 fraudulent beggars than to turn away one person in real.
And I remember reading something somewhere where a woman was in a grocery line wearing name brand clothing. Her little kid had on Nike tennis shoes, you know, an infant wearing Nike tennis shoes. That's just stupid.
Yeah.
And paying her food with food stamps. And somebody said something to her, and she turned around and said, I bought all this at Goodwill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say, because I spent a large part of my time diving for the little Nike shoes that, you know, were definitely going to be, you know, sold immediately. And a lot of people too, they resell those. So that provides income to them. And I had people I specifically knew, if I didn't get out there and bust it and get X number of shoes on the floor that day, they wouldn't meet their quota to resell. So yeah, so it's when you see what actually goes on behind the scenes, it changes things.
I buy all of my stuff at Goodwill except undergarments. I love the hunt, the search for a good piece.
I mean, I can't, having worked there, I can't say enough good things about, you know, every division is independently run and it's different, but the Richmond division really, the management, you know, like anything else, you have good and you have bad, but I lasted there probably longer than at any other job because I enjoyed working there.
So I have two things to share, one about Goodwill and one about the point before about giving must befit the person. So now giving must befit the person, that reminds me of the old adage, you know, rather than, I'm not quoting it right, but, you know, rather than keep giving somebody fish, you teach them how to fish.
Right.
So they can, and that's part of what Week of Compassion does. It's not just out there around the world giving out stuff. It is helping people recover from the disaster and learn new skills and have the equipment they need to be independent to do it themselves. And then on Goodwill, one thing that I learned this through Hermitage, they have so many books that are given to them. to Goodwill that they have set up a system now here in Richmond that school librarian staff, they have these huge carrier things full of books. And they haven't been doing it this year, but the schools will have a designated day that they can come in, their staff can come in, dig through those books, pull out all the books they want. And then the librarians at Hermitage, they bring them back and they have a free corner and kids can take free books.
Yay.
And so, it's just, how that all turns around. And those books clear out, let me tell you.
Good.
They clear out.
I have two things I want to say. Number one, I just recently bought the complete works of William Shakespeare from Goodwill for $1. It was put together by the Oxford University Press with a commentary and the whole 9 yards for $1.
Wow.
And the second thing is one of my favorite charities is Child Fund, where they send out these catalogs where you can buy goats and pigs and seeds and fruit trees and all of that. That's one of my favorite to do. I often wonder who ended up with the pigs or the chicks or whatever.
Pepper.
You can do that through Church World Service also. In fact, Church World Service, you can buy honeybees.
Oh,
A water buffalo. Yeah.
Yep, water buffalo, goats.
I was interesting that to hear that there was how people gave back then, that there's a secret place in the temple, Barclay tells us, where people came to give their gifts. And so the gifts were given in secrecy. And then from there, it was doled out. And he particularly said to help impoverished members of once noble families and give their daughters the dowry so that they could be married.
Well, when I was at Bethany, the bookkeeper, the minister was not allowed to see the list of who gave and how much. Is that true at our church? So no judgments would be made based on who gave what money?
I have no idea. When I was treasurer, of course, I didn't know either. So that's a question for either Duke Dale or the Clarks.
I would be shocked there's no reason a minister would need to know, but
No.
we got a new minister at Bethany who requested the list of givers in the church and how much, and the bookkeeper was incensed and said, absolutely not. There's no reason you would need to know that, and refused to
Good.
give it to the new minister.
Good, I like that.
I do too.
I also like the one Barclay is saying that it's the manner of giving must be fit the character and temperament of the recipient. So that if you have someone who is very miserly, you might give a gift, but afterward you actually reclaim it from their estate. If they didn't use the money, if they didn't really need the money, they had the money, but they weren't using it. If someone was too proud to ask for help, you offer to give them a loan to allow them to keep their self-respect, but then it's really a gift and they never ask for it to be repaid back. Or if someone was unable to respond for help, that you can't give money, that you can offer your sympathy, nothing else. So it's like, it's the manner of the person. So you're trying to do what's best for that person or the people that are in need.
I think you also have to give something worthwhile. You should not be giving outdated canned goods. You should not be, when we went to Bethany, the boys were little and they had to take a can of vegetable every Sunday morning and put it in the food basket. And Jason would take beets. Jason and I eat beets. And I said, honey, most people don't eat beets. I think I've told you this before. So he grabbed the imported can of LeSueur peas. So he ended up, so we kept the beets because I didn't think people at a food bank would eat beets. And he grabbed the most expensive vegetable which is fine. But
I would think that peas would also be something that I wouldn't want to have canned peas.
I
But-
love beets.
I do too. But a lot of people don't.
Really?
Well, they're trendy now. They're a trendy food to eat now.
So are Brussels sprouts. Ugh.
I love Brussels sprouts.
Ooh.
I love
yeah.
Brussels sprouts, and he's over here making the same face that
Ooh.
some of y'all are making.
But wait, I will tell you that when I was in school many years ago, we received that we did a science experiment in class, and there's a chemical that's present in broccoli and in Brussels sprouts that this little piece of paper was coated in. And you put the piece of paper on your tongue, and if you were a taster, if you had the gene to taste that, you spit the paper out immediately, and otherwise it tasted like nothing. So
Yep.
half the class spit the paper out, and I sat there going, what? You know? So it's not someone's fault if they say, I hate broccoli. There's probably a reason genetically why they do.
That's a good point.
Well,
I think
roast your Brussels sprouts.
cilantro is the same way, I think.
Yes,
Some
it is.
people
It tastes like
detest
soap.
cilantro.
Tastes like soap to me.
Yeah, and Tom and I love it. So yeah.
Right. Think of it
All right.
this way, that giving isn't just a privilege, it's an obligation. That in reality, all giving is nothing less than giving to God. So would you give God peas and beets and Brussels sprouts? Maybe. Maybe.
Don't you think giving is like prayer? It's one of those things all religions do.
Mhm.
Giving and taking care of orphans and widows. There are certain things that are consistent in all religions, and that's one of them.
Mhm.
You know, I think about how much I learned from Satina and Abdi,
Oh,
and
yeah.
some from Ahmed,
Yeah.
but about giving,
Yeah.
you know, the number of times each of us that would take her shopping would have to refuse because she wanted to give back to you half of the food that you just took her to buy.
Yeah.
And she was only spending like $70 a week to feed 3 people.
I took the bottle of water so she would feel good.
Yes, I did too. We would go through Walmart and I would say, I'll take that bottle.
Yes.
That's, and that took a lot of negotiation to get her to that point.
So if we refuse to give, we refuse God. And Barclay has this quote, he who befriends the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his good deed. To everyone who shows mercy to other men, mercy is shown from heaven, but everyone who shows not mercy to other men, no mercy is shown in heaven. And I think that we've had conversations in the class before about what goes through our hearts when we're driving down the road and we see someone begging on the side of the street, you know, and what do we do? You know, we don't look them in the eye, you know, some people give. I think that we've had some people say that whenever they'll usually have some bills to be able to always give to someone if they see them like that. So I think that what did you kind of get out of this particular section, gracious giving section? Barclay is saying, is Jesus asking us to provide indiscriminate giving, done at random without careful judgment? And we don't think that that's a fact. We think that we're really giving to the receiver. The receiver has to be taken into account, like you had mentioned, Kitten. You have to really look and see what their needs are, and that you're not encouraging the receiver to not do anything. You're trying to encourage them and give them things that will help them. And again, that statement about it's better to help 20 fraudulent beggars than to turn away the person that's really in need.
Yeah, but this sentence was in the middle of what you were just talking about. Giving must never be such as to encourage the recipient in laziness and shiftlessness, for such giving can only hurt.
Mhm.
Yeah, we are commanded not to give and hurt people. If they're
Yeah.
able to get up and do for themselves, we need to encourage that. And Kathy was really good about Abdi and Ahmed and Satina working very firm about that.
Yeah, they needed to. Yeah.
Right. They needed to, so that they could prepare to be on their own.
Right.
And-
Right. Right.
Okay, so ready to move on?
Yes.
Comments about giving? The next section is Matthew 43 through 48. Would someone like to read that? If you have
I'll
the-
read. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
You have heard that it has been said, you shall love your neighbor and you shall hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may become the sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward can you expect? Do not even the tax gatherers do that? If you greet only your brothers, where is there anything extra about that? Do not even the Gentiles do that? So then you must be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect.
And isn't this basically the central teaching of Jesus? Is love.
Yep.
It's the Christianity in action. Gandhi even said, and it's a hatred is a universal problem. The hatred we feel toward people kind of wells up inside us and causes us to do destructive things, and for people who might have harmed us in some way. But in the end, we're all children of God. We're all fellow human beings. We have to live together.
All fruit. We're all fruit.
We're all, he's going with my Greek wedding where it says we're apples and oranges, but we're all fruit. But there is a quote by Gandhi. It is easy enough to be friendly to one's friends, but to befriend the one who regards himself as your enemy is the quintessence of true religion. And this idea is taught not just by Christ, but by many people and other religions. But it absolutely sometimes seems impossible. How do you love your enemy? And there was I found a little story, kind of a joke told by the Reverend James Martin. He's a Jesuit priest. And I'll read that little joke to you. He says, a priest is giving a sermon based on Jesus's command to love your enemies. Now he says, I'll bet many of us feel we have enemies in our life. So raise your hands if you have many enemies. And quite a few people raise their hands. And he says, now raise your hands if you only have a few enemies. And a little bit smaller amount raise their hands. He says, now raise your hands if you only have one or two enemies. And even fewer people raise their hands. And he says, see, most of us feel we have enemies. Now raise your hand if you have no enemies at all. And so the priest looks around, and finally he says, way in the back, there's this old man. And the old man says, I have no enemies whatsoever. And delighted, the priest invites the man to the front of the church. What a blessing, the priest says. How old are you? I'm 98 years old, and I have no enemies. The priest says, what a wonderful Christian life you've led. And now tell us, how is it you have no enemies? And the old man said, all the bastards have died. So enemies aren't just like enemies of the state or terrorists or things like that. We're not talking just about that. We're talking about people in our everyday lives that we deal with every day, family, friends, coworkers, people that we dislike it anyway. And no matter, how good we are or what we do, we usually have some people who've offended us or we've apologized to but won't accept it, that members of our family that we're holding grudges against. I think you've mentioned that sometimes.
But I don't hate anybody. If I had to make a list of people I hate,
Yeah.
I don't hate anybody. I pray for them, I forgive them, and I move forward.
Very good. How did you do that?
Well, it took a long time, and I did go to therapy. But I'm not carrying that around. It's like, I hate dad for drinking, and I hate mom for being angry, and I hate my brother for stealing money out of the account, and blah, blah, blah. I'm not carrying that around. I pray about it, let it go.
And what Barclay is saying is that Jesus is really trying with this to move his disciples beyond what they knew with, about love, into helping them to live according to his new law of love. That loving our enemies and praying for those who persecute us is hard, but if we want to live it out, we need to kind of be clear, he says, of what this means. And he kind of, if we remember from from last week, when Sarah was talking about the slap on the cheek and turning the other cheek story in Matthew 5:39, that you were talking about it, they specified the right cheek, which means an insult, and that that it constitutes an insult, not a violent assault kind of a thing. And that he says that, so some scholars say that when Jesus says the other cheek, the idea is that when you're insulted by a slap on the cheek, you should turn away and not retaliate. So it's not so much an invitation for someone else to whack you again, but that it's the main thing is that you're not retaliating.
Well, that's another thing I learned too, for people that I guess I used to hate as a younger person. I just don't have any interaction with them. I mean, if they refuse to forgive me, or if they hurt me, I mean, some people I just choose not to have a relationship with, and I choose not to be around.
So it's kind of like you're not doing something. You're kind of, you don't retaliate, you don't.
Right.
And I think it's also very important to evaluate the definition of enemy in terms of if someone has genuinely, tried to harm me, then I should be concerned about that person. But how many people go through the day and say, oh, I don't like this type of person, or I don't like that one, or they just see someone and they decide they don't like them because of their appearance or something like that. That person might consider those people their enemy, but in truth, they're not. So if Jesus is saying love your enemy.
You have something?
I just have to say that personally, I think I'm my own worst enemy on many days, and probably I have the hardest time forgiving myself for stupid things I do or things I should have done and didn't do.
Yeah, so he goes into a lot of, discusses a lot about what kind of love this is. And he talks about it's not romantic love, it's not family love, it's the different words that Greeks use for love, but it says that it's the agape love, that we're supposed to agape our enemies or our adversaries, or whatever we might want to call them. So no matter what they do to us, how they treat us, how they insult us, we never allow bitterness against them to invade our hearts. We will regard them with goodwill and seek nothing but their highest good. That is hard. To love your enemy is to find it in your heart to put aside any wrongs and to love them as a fellow human being, a child of God. So
let me ask you something, Susan. When this was written, were they referring to quote unquote enemies within the Jewish population? Because I don't think they were referring to the people who would come and attack them, or they would go out and attack and kill. It's almost like they were talking about within our community, get along, love one another.
And in Deuteronomy, it says Israelites. It's specifically saying, with our group of people giving, you remember. So we assume that that's what they're talking about. Not like they wouldn't ever go to war with anyone.
Right. Love the Assyrians and the Babylonians and all the other folks. No.
Well, I'm reading a book now, The Brothers of Auschwitz, and I've never read, and I've read dozens of these books, biographies about people that survived the Holocaust. This is the only book where one brother is talking to the other brother before they get sent away about why do people hate us? And one brother says, because in business, sometimes some Jews take advantage of other Jews and Gentiles. Like if I'm the only shoe store in town and I charge twice the price for a pair of shoes, you know, that they could go into Berlin and get, I'm taking advantage of my Jewish brother or my Gentile brother, and people hate it, but they have to pay the price because they can't afford to drive 3 hours to Berlin. It's 1922. So this is the first book I've read where it talked about why the local people hated the Jewish population. And in most cases, it was because of they took advantage of them in business dealings, in loaning money and in business dealings. And I've never read a book before that addressed why did some people hate the Jews? So I imagine Jews took advantage of other Jews and some would hate them.
Well, but also, and I got this growing up, the way the Bible's written, it looks like the Jews were responsible for the crucifixion of Jesus. And so it was kind of, you know, we won't get into all of that, but a lot of anti-Semitism is that the Jews killed Jesus. So we need to punish them for that.
Wasn't wasn't that, Sarah, the prevailing thought until the Pope in the 1960s finally said, we're not taking that approach anymore. But it was the 20th century before the Catholics forgave the Jews for killing Jesus. It's like, come on, guys.
Yeah.
There was an official action to do that. Right?
Yes, yes.
But I read something out of this book that really, in terms of the different types of love, in the case of and I'm at the bottom of 200, but in the case of our enemies, love is not only something of the heart, it is also something of the will. It is not something which we cannot help, like falling in love. It is something which we will have to will ourselves into doing. It is, in fact, a victory over that which comes instinctively to us by our very nature. So
I can tell you, I had to will myself to like my mother. My mother was a very difficult person, very narcissistic, selfish, self-centered. I went to visit once a month, but I had to will myself to deal with her. Well, it was very hard.
I had some, you know, I had issues with my mother as well, and you know, went and got a little bit of help. And I remember saying, I love her, but I don't like her.
Me too. Absolutely. I respected her. I honored her. I loved her, but I did not like her as a person.
Right.
You also can't underestimate the power of humans to hate something for no reason at all. Dr. Seuss wrote the book, the Sneetches, about the Starbelly Sneetches. All you have to do is see a difference. And then between two groups and the power of groups of like people coming together and then hating another group they'll find reasons. They'll find the reason of, oh, they killed Jesus, or, oh, they're too successful, or they're taking our jobs away, or whatever. You can't underestimate the power, you know, of what people of hatred and what it can do.
Oh, work in a middle school for a couple of years, you'll learn that process.
Have any of us changed groups? Growing up, I was a country kid and I hated the townies from Lawrenceville, a big metropolis, because they went to cotillion and they had piano lessons and ballet, and they got to do all these things that my family couldn't afford to do anyway. But then when I became an adult, Jason and Daniel went to cotillion and they did soccer. And, you know, they did all these things that I was against as a kid because I wasn't in that group. So I left the country group and joined the townie group. And I'm like, oh, now I dislike that other group.
Right.
So you change groups, you know.
Yeah, and the art group in our high school was like a low group, you know, all of the little artists. But when we got to college, the art group was the creative group. So you change, but
We mature, we grow in Christ.
but you don't have to. Usually hatred doesn't always have to have a particular reason, because you find reasons, to hate people that are different, from you. But I kind of liked when he said that agape doesn't mean that we just leave our enemies unchecked either, or people against us, that because we're supposed to love them just like children, we're supposed to try to love them and help them. But when Barclay is mentioning, no one who loves their children just lets them do whatever they want, run out in the street and play and whatever, that you're trying to always be on their side, make them better people. But also Barclay had mentioned that Jesus laid down this love down as a basis for personal relationships, that when Jesus said we're to love our enemies, he was creating a new standard for our relationship with others. And so it's not just with the people that we would say are enemies of our country or whatever, it's all of the relationships that we are in. And it's easier for us to maybe say that there shouldn't be wars between nations. It's easier for us to say it because we don't take a lot of personal responsibility for that. It's a lot harder for us to say that we should love all of the people in our lives around us, the people, the townies and the country people and all of those people. And now one of the things that Barclay says is that this commandment is only possible for a Christian. What did you think of that? To love your enemies.
Well, I'm not sure what he meant by that, but I know the Muslims and other religions teach that you help other people of other faiths and religions and beliefs. And so I don't think only Christians teach this. I think Muslims, I mean, I don't hate anybody of another religion.
Now I can say that if we are Christians, that through Christ and through God, it can help us do it. That it can help us. It says, Barclay is saying, only the grace of Jesus Christ can enable us to have this unconquerable benevolence and goodwill in our personal relationships with other people.
I disagree with this, because that grace from Jesus Christ, that grace comes from God. That's God's grace.
And don't we all believe that when God created everybody, he put a little piece of himself in us, which is soul, spirit, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And I believe there's a piece of God in everybody on earth, and probably in cats and dogs, and all living creatures have a piece of the holy in them.
Mm-hmm.
My cats have more than most.
So we're asked we're asked to pray for those, which is opening our hearts to those. That agape, it's easier to love someone when you pray for them. Has anyone found this
Yes.
helpful?
Yeah. When I used to get particularly irritated at my students because they just refused to do anything they were supposed to do, if I would pray for them more consciously, I found myself changing my attitude toward them. So yes, it does make a difference.
I agree.
Because when you make that conscious act, you're making a decision. And we make decisions to love and we make decisions to hate. And we can make decisions to change too. And so when you're making that conscious decision to pray for somebody. Yeah.
Well, and isn't that the difference between the ladies in the church in Charleston, Carolina, that forgave the boy who came in and shut up the church during the prayer meeting, and the people who testify I want him to get the death penalty and I want to be in the room and I'll flip the switch. And I mean, that's the difference in those groups of people.
Yeah. And so Barclay then moves from the meaning of Christian love to the reason for it. Why did Jesus command us to love our enemies? And he says simply, it is that such a love makes us like God. Okay. And he uses, there are two quotes that I have written down here. One from Martin Luther King Jr. says that love is the only force capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. And Mother Teresa said, the hunger for love is much more difficult to remove than the hunger for bread. And so a lot of times whenever you end up going to a psychologist or needing help, you find that it's because of something in your life where you've felt unloved or not understood. And so I really like what Barclay also talks about is that Jesus points to God's actions in the world, where making the sun rise and set on the good and the evil, sending the rain on the just and the unjust in this passage. And another commentator had said, by using an illustration of the sun rising and the rain falling on both the good and the evil, Jesus shows God's undiscriminating love to all people. His disciples then must reflect his character and exhibit the same undiscriminating love to both friends and enemies. That he's really giving us a higher standard than what the world expects. That it might be hard to attain this on our own, but with the help of God, that we can attain it. So we think this is impossible, but it's not impossible, you know.
Shouldn't we consider ourselves making progress in being Christ-like as we get older? I mean, I'm more Christ-like now than I was when I was 20. Just because. So I think if we're moving in that direction, we're headed in the right direction.
And I just love Romans. In Romans 12, I'm going to read love in action, because we talk about this as God making love in action. And this is not from Matthew, but from Romans. Love, and you'll recognize it. Love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good, be devoted to one another in love, honor one another above yourselves, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord, be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, share with the Lord's people who are in need, practice hospitality, bless those who persecute you, bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn, live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. And I think that is in Paul's writing, that is kind of the summary of some of the things that we've been reading here in Matthew of Jesus' teaching.
Don't you think it's much easier for us to do that with other Christians? Paul was writing to Romans who were having to do that to pagans they were welcoming into the church. I mean, it would have been really hard in the first century church to do that with pagan people.
Jesus is a little controversial back then.
Yeah.
We know that, and even today. And so Jesus says we must have this love in order that we may become children or sons of our Father who is in heaven. So translated, Barclay translate that a son of God is a godlike person. Okay. We have to have this kind of love because God has this kind of love, and we're children of God. And it ends with, you therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect.
This conjures up a lot of stuff for me, but put it in context of the kind of love we're talking about. And your neighbor is a drug dealer and a member of some gang that is plenty willing to shoot you in a heartbeat and not even think about it. And how do you share this agape love without becoming an enabler for that kind of nonsense to continue going? And also, I guess on a whole other level, and I don't want to get off on politics, but we are a very divided country, and we're very divided in our own circles of people that we know. And I wrestle with that a lot.
Yeah. I like the when he talks about perfect and being perfect, we're all trying to be good people, but where he used the analogy of the screwdriver. Did you all, any of you, get to read that?
Yeah.
Where that you find the perfect screwdriver, that to be perfect, a thing is perfect if it achieves a human being is perfect if they achieve the purpose for which they were created and sent into the world, and describes that the perfect screwdriver fits the hand perfectly and does the job perfectly and solves the problem, kind of a thing. And that it was very, very rewarding for me to read what purpose were people created. In Genesis, let us make man in our image after our likeness. And human beings were being created to be like God. Okay, therefore, we're trying to be that benevolence, give the same universal benevolence and goodwill that God gives all of us. But it's very difficult, for us to do, like you were saying. So I think that it's already 9:50, so we're kind of running out of time. But one of the things that you might want to think about is, other than needing to be like a child of God and loving people as God loves everyone, there are also other benefits that you get from letting go and loving people. It's more, you're happier, you can release, you can possibly change a person's life, change an enemy into a friend. And then also trying to figure out what are the benefits other than just being and doing as Jesus taught us and following Jesus. And then does anyone have any tips for how do you find, if you have someone that you're mad at, what do you do to try to love that person or agape that person and seek goodwill for them? There's a website that I saw called Zen Habits, and it says this is the hardest thing that we're ever asked to do, is to love people that we're angry with, and so that they had like 10 tips that are very Zen-like, putting yourself in their shoes, stopping and taking a breath, seeking to understand. So we need to think about those kinds of things. This is one of the major things we're asked to do and commanded by Jesus, is to love. And so throughout Matthew and all the studies we do in the Bible, it's the thing we're going to be struggling with the most, is how to be more like Jesus and to follow Jesus and to do what God wants us to do.
Mhm.
Thank you, Susan.
Yes, thank you.
Sometimes that love takes a different form though, and that's the tough love thing, where you have somebody who you can love them all you want in the sense we might normally think about love, but you really love them when you say, I've had enough and you need
Well,
to
and that's,
go into this program.
and I
or
think the
whatever.
children, the analogy of when you love your child, what do you do for them? Well, that's what you would want to
Give
do
them
for
treat.
this person.
You set
Okay.
boundaries and rules and expectations.
That's right. Okay, well, thank you. And
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.